cops of Reddit. What's the most bull sounding excuse you got that actually turned out to be true? Not a cop, but my dad rolls cigars. He uses this white powder called vegetable gum to seal the wrapper. You mix it with some water and it gets sticky and clear. In powder form it looks similar to C. My dad had a massive bag on him after a rolling event one night and got pulled over for a traffic violation. They saw the bag of powder laying in a box and asked what it was, and my dad told them. I guess they didn't believe him because they called back up. They had my dad cuffed while they tested it, and sure enough it came back as not C. They let him go, but it still cracks me up hearing the story. Not a cop, but my dad rolls cigars. Lol wax sentence. Had a domestic in progress I responded to during Christmas Day, and the excuse for them fighting was we're not mad at each other, we're just upset because we wanted to surprise the kids for Christmas. We got some deer, dressed them up. Now they're destroying our house. It turns out there was literally 3 fully grown white-tailed deer in the house, somehow dressed with full bell harnesses like Santa's reindeer. I had to call the game wardens down, who were then able to help me remove the deer from the property without injury to us or them. How they managed to get the deer and dress them up is still a mystery to this day. Okay, so legit answer. One night I'm out working, and as I go down the street, fairly nice middle class area surrounded by some high crime neighborhoods, around midnight I see a dude on a bike, no lights on, pulling a lawnmower behind him on a rope. I immediately flip a 180 and light him up. Recognize the guy as a local homeless dude with some prior burglary theft arrests. I walk up and just open with "Dude, come on." Guy holds his hands out and swears he didn't steal the lawnmower. Claims someone just gave it to him. I ask who, and he doesn't know a name. So I demand he tell me where to find said lawnmower owner. The directions he gave were literally go that way a bit, then right at a stop sign, and take one of those side streets that way. It's about halfway down a street, at a house that has a pickup and a car in the driveway. By this point backup had arrived, so I'll leave him in the presence of backup and drive off in search of his mythical donor of lawn equipment. I made a decent guess as to the first turn, then flipped a mental coin as to which of the next 3 side streets he would have gone down. I pick the second of the 3 streets and start down it. Every other freaking house has a truck and car combo. There must have been a dozen houses that matched the description. Halfway down, I see an average looking house and go EHH. I'll try this one. After all, it's midnight and this is a wild goose chase. Go up, ring the doorbell. Middle-aged dude comes to the door. "Hello sir, have you been giving away lawnmowers to random sketchy homeless guys at midnight today?" Yes, as a matter of fact, he had. Homeowner goes on to complain to me that his wife was upset as his continual inability to get the mower running, and had ordered him with some severity to remove the mower from the house or face the consequences. He pushed it to the curb right as homeless guy rode by, and the latter had asked and received his permission to take it. I drove back in shock and amazement, apologized to homeless guy, and sent him on his way. A few months later we ran into each other at a nearby gas station, and he told me it turned out just to need a new spark plug, and that he had gotten it running again, before going on to sell it for $150 to someone. For years after, whenever I would run into him, he would always make sure to remind me of the money he made from selling that stolen lawnmower. Lol. Man, the odds of guessing the right street and house. One of the funnier ones that I remember, we got a call for a kid. He was 18 and a gang member, brandishing a firearm. He had pulled up his shirt pretending to brandish a firearm to intimidate somebody. The person calling only saw a holster. After we got there, he kept telling us it wasn't a gun but a corncob. We took him down at gunpoint and he was right. He was walking around with a holstered, black dildo. Why? Because he could. Haha. The balls on this guy, seriously. Not really an excuse, but shocked the crap out of me. I've always been told a diabetic with high blood sugar acts the same as someone who is drunk. Get a call for a car all over the road, hitting trash cans on the side of the road and whatnot. We stop the car and get the driver out. He's slurring his speech like no other. Can't maintain his balance to save his life. Fails all the sobriety tests, but blew zeros on the PBT. He denied drinking and swears up and down he didn't do any drugs. Never mentions the diabetes. We're all scratching our heads and I remember the blood sugar thing. Call medical to our location and sure as crap his blood sugar was 550 and he finally remembers that he hadn't taken insulin in 8 hours. My dad is an officer and he pulled someone over for speeding and running a red light and they said their breast implant burst. He called EMS to rush them to the hospital and turned out it did and it's actually very dangerous if they leak. Not the cop in this story, but someone crashed into a tree on their way to work and most people have an excuse as to why they weren't at fault when they crash. In this particular case the woman said an owl flew into her car and she swerved off the road into a tree. Anyway, said cop gets into the car to move it for the tow truck and sure enough an owl flies from the back seat past the officer's face and out the front window. Surprises the cop. Scared the crap out of him I imagine. The owl was included in the diagram of the accident report. I wanna see this diagram. Not a cop. I am an attorney. I had a client who agreed to cooperate in a criminal matter. He was charged in a drive-by shooting. As part of the cooperation he had to divulge where his gun came from. He told the prosecutor that he found it in a tree. The prosecutor got angry at the response. He began to lambaste my client. When the detective said, "Wait, I had a case where the shooter claimed to have hidden his gun in a tree, but it wasn't there when we went to get it." He asked my client where the tree was located. Same tree. I was as surprised as the prosecutor that he had told the truth. Was doing a tour as an MP. Not my normal job, but whole other story. And we got called on a domestic. At the house, there is this huge corn-fed guy about 6 feet 4 inches and 275, and a petite Asian girl about 4'10" inches and 95 pounds soaking wet. The whole house was in disarray, and the call had come because of yelling heard by the neighbors. She was crying and talking in an Asian language that none of us understood, and kept gesturing toward her huge husband. He wasn't talking. We wrap him up, take him to the station, and are trying to interview him, but he's not saying much. We intend to charge him with domestic assault. We notice somewhere along the way that he has horrible welts all along the backs of his hands and along his forearms. It took a lot of prying, but we finally got out of him that his wife would beat him with wire coat hangers when she was mad, and apparently that was pretty often. He was too embarrassed to admit to anybody that he was being abused by his wife who was less than a third of his size. We finally got it straightened out, turned her over to the local police, and barred her from base. Hopefully the guy got the help he needed. Not a cop. Family friend was. Pulled a guy over who was speeding profusely. Guy was obviously disheveled. He said he was headed to the hospital because he had a tick on his dong. Cop was confused, but he escorted him there, then waited in the lobby to check on him see if he was blowing smoke. After a while, he asked the desk what was going on, why it took so long to take a tick off his penis. Her reply, it wasn't on it, it was in it. Popped a college kid for crappy driving and pulled 100 grams of weed off of him. Also, a 1-pound glass pipe shaped like a huge nail. No biggie. Also find weed under the other college kids in the car. Driver falls on the sword and tells me all of it is his and lets his friends walk free. I like this kid. However, during the search we find package addies in the cellophane of a cigarette pack with the top melted closed. Goddamn, it intensifies. Ask kid if he's dealing addies at school. Tell him I'm aware of the prescription pill epidemic. He says no and spins a huge yarn about how he only carries a few on him because he's had his orange pill bottle stolen so many times. Kid seems like a pretty good dude. I decided to take the X-Files approach. Supervisor tells me pursue charges for dealing. Blah blah blah. I tell the kid he has one chance to prove he's telling the truth. Shows me the broken glass under his driver's seat from a vehicle burglary. Go to do better. I follow behind him back to his dorm. He lets me in and shows me the busted footlocker he kept them in under his bed. Dunno. Kinda weak. Supervisor's telling me to hurry and drop the axe. Tell him to do better. He calls one of the soccer team assistants up and we meet him in the locker room. Shows me the little wooden locker which has a broken lock. Assistant coach tells me they have replaced the lock on his cabinet 3 times. Campus security has numerous reports of medicine theft from this kid. Nice. I call supervisor up and tell him I have no grounds to pursue delivery charges. Poor bastard just kept getting his Adderalls jacked and being the big dumb meatball he was, he started packaging them like that. I end up talking to his best friend breaking up a house party a couple months later. Friend tells me kid is a stand-up guy who only uses weed due to extreme anxiety. Totally believable from my interaction with him. And has never sold anything in his life. Friend thanked me and told me his buddies spoke well of me. Friend also tells me he had to drive his buddy to the hospital a few hours after I left from a panic attack due to the whole incident. I felt bad for the kid. So now, whenever I see him smoking up in his car in the mall parking lot, I just wave. When do we put you in charge of all police? Former cop here. I was behind a vehicle that couldn't stay in the lane, kept swerving, etc. It was 1 AM, and I think another drunk idiot on the road. Pull him over. Guy is a straight up butthole to me. Cursed me out, yelling at me, and I notice his speech is slurred. I get him out to car, and I can smell a fruity smell on his breath and he has to lean against the car for support. I ask him how much he had to drink and he tells me to frick off. By this point I am ready to bring him in for a DUI, but I just had a feeling something wasn't right. I called EMS to come check him. Blood sugar was at 40, not drunk, just a diabetic. If I would have arrested him, he probably would have died before I finished the paperwork. Go with your gut if something doesn't seem right. Not a cop, but I did get stopped by one for eating a taco. I worked at a community college in La that had a high school right next to it. Well, there was a lot of drugs sold through the fence at the high school, so there was always a cops driving up and down the street between the schools. Couldn't get a parking pass since I just worked at the school, so I always parked on that street. Hit up Taco Bell for lunch and was sitting in my car eating my double-decker tacos when a cop drove past. Next thing I know, he's flipping a U-turn and heading right for me. He slides to a stop driver window to driver window and yells at, "What the heck do you think you're doing?" Stunned, I just said eating my lunch. Well, he isn't buying it and says I'm hiding something. I just hold up my taco and looked so confused. He burst out laughing and peeled out. Saw him a few times after that and he always waved and had the biggest grin on his face. Not a cop, but I have a very common name and got pulled over for driving across the median, and there was a warrant out for me for rape and assault or something. As it turns out, a guy with the exact same name and birthday born in the same city as this, and it took me about 20 minutes of pleading to get the officers to realize I did not match the description. I deal with this dude every once in a while. As it turns out, our socials are off by 1 digit. If I ever see him, we are going to have a long talk. Good God, how the heck? It's like the opposite of having a look-alike. My first ever real call was for a flasher at the local park. When I got there and finally found him, it was a mentally impaired young man 16-17 who had a pair of headphones on in a full Pooh Bear. I said, "Hey man, come here, what the heck is going on? You know you have to keep your pants on, especially at the park." He goes on to tell me he had bad itching down his pants and couldn't take it anymore, so he had to rip his pants off and was running home to get help. I said, "Come on, you couldn't make it home first?" He said, "No, I had ants in my pants." Sure as crap, according to more than one witness's account. He had been sitting in a sandbox playing at the park and accidentally on a nest of red ants that had crawled up his pant legs. I love that this was your first call. I'm running booking one night. Guy gets brought in for possessing a truly stupendous amount of drugs. I am talking like 2 Rubbermaid totes full of shrooms, a huge bag of weed, and enough H to overdose half the county. "Well," says he, "I'm a informant and they told me to make the drop so they could be there and raid the crap out of everybody and let me go for helping." Right. Faith left please. Guy is like, "I'm telling you dude, fear gonna be suoopapee that you country retards fricked up fire bust. Whatever. Get in the holding cell and shut up." About 3 hours later, 3 guys show up. D agents. Fear super p that our deputies fricked up fire bust. I go back to the holding cell to let the guy out, and he's just like, "Fear super p, huh? Yep, told you so." Former US Coast Guard, and actually did law enforcement. For those unfamiliar, the Carolinas in the States, and especially Wrightsville Beach, Myrtle Beach, New Topsail, Lockwood's Folly along the NCSE border are overflowing with drunken or stupid boaters during the summers, especially with UNCW nearby. Drunk college kids on the water everywhere doing reckless crap. BWIs, illegal charters, fricking around outside of the channel, cutting bows, speeding, ignoring no wake zones, and even the odd drug trafficking, illegal firearms trafficking charges. Suffice it to say, combined with hurricane season, we were quite busy from May-September. One Friday afternoon our Rod gets a call out on channel 16, like 911 boaters, from a captain calling in a pontoon boat that has flipped and 20 young, intoxicated males in the water. We arrive on scene with another 47 feet from a nearby station and are fishing these drunk idiots from the water. They pack 24 people on board a 14-person pontoon boat and of course it flipped. As we're pulling them out, literally all of them were drunkenly threatening us with their daddy's law firm. It was like a crappy 90s teen MTV rom-com come to life. We just rolled our eyes, zip-tied them, didn't pack enough cuffs and 90% of them were combative drunk even seeing the pistols on our hips, rifles, shotgun slings. Turns out it was an entire frat of future lawyers studying at Ellen whose fathers were all lawyers as well. Still didn't save them from the local US attorney and reckless operation of a boat, BWI, and license captain, etc charges. Still was surreal with dozens of drunk 20-year-old dudes wailing and telling us their daddy would sue us. Don't even get me started on jet skier stories. Not a cop, but I had a run-in with one that was really funny once. When I was 18, I was on a double date with a friend, and we stepped out of a restaurant to smoke. A cop came up and started harassing us, telling us there had been break-ins into cars in the area. Eventually, he said he needed to pat us down, and he pulled a brown paper bag out of my friend's pocket. He got a smug look on his face and asked, "So, what's in here?" "Huh," my friend said, "the Emancipation Proclamation," with a completely straight face. The cop opened the bag, pulled out a small booklet, got embarrassed, and let us go. My friend had been to the Lincoln Museum earlier that day and did actually have a small copy of the Emancipation Proclamation in his pocket. Mid-July in like 2008, young kid going 93 in a 55. I swing and he immediately pulls over, approaching the car. His first words before I can even start speaking: "My dog died. He hung himself. I gotta get back before my mom gets home." What JPG? Anyway, he calls other family members. His aunt, uncle and 2 cousins come out to the stop, and between all their sobbing, they verify that the dog had actually hopped over the fence on a leash runner and couldn't get back over. Everyone's crying now. They showed me a photo on their phone. Apparently they found the dog and called the kid at work and he just left. I didn't even bother verifying further than that. Cousin drove the kid's car back so they could take care of the dog and prepare for mom. Some said that I should have wrote him, but losing an animal sucks enough. He knew he fricked up and adding financial burden to him wasn't going to help him or me. I'm glad there are cops out there who understand both how horrible losing a dog is and how financially hard it is to get a ticket as a kid. Insurance is already too high. Of course kids should be more careful and it's not the cops' fault they got pulled over, but you did the right thing in this scenario. I was driving with my fiancé and we went through a roadblock where they checked registration and crap. And we get to the cops and they ask for our registration. I'm sitting in the passenger seat, so I open up the glove box and right there is a clear and marked baggie filled to the brim with catnip. I completely forgot it was there and just froze, wide-eyed. I turned to look at the cop shining his light through my open window and he's frozen too, just staring at the baggie with this look on his face like, really? I just started immediately professing, "OMG, I swear to God this is catnip. You can take it and smell it or test it or whatever, like I swear." And at this point it's just so ridiculous that I start cracking up, and the cop takes it and reasonably deduces I'm telling the truth. And he starts laughing and calls his partner over and tells her what happened, and they both just cackled away for a minute and sent us on our way. Catweed. Good thing they weren't cat cops. My dad was a cop and my favorite story of his goes like this. He's a young cop in a rough neighborhood. It's so late that the stoplights are flashing red, meaning treat it like a stop sign. Out of nowhere this pink caddy goes rolling through the intersection. My dad pulls him over. A big black dude was driving. The caddy had fur interior, dice in the mirror. A real pimp car if you know what I mean. My dad goes, "So do you know you ran that light back there?" And this guy says, "Officer, I do believe I got between the flashes." My dad was laughing so hard he had to let the guy go. I can just imagine the dude's thought process when he saw the flashing red light. Cop here. Got a call of a domestic dispute that sounded very heated and a lot of banging was heard. Get a scene and I can hear someone yelling and swearing and brawling. Doesn't sound good at all. Guy answers the door. shirt off and angry, but seems bewildered as to why police had been called. He told me he was building IKEA furniture. Sounds like the most bulls thing. But we enter, see the new IKEA furniture half set up and no one else is home. Color me surprised. Oh man, totally been there before, haha. This was my favorite story from my 4th grade teacher, not a cop. She went to her cousin's wedding in mid-July. The cousin had overestimated how much champagne they would need at the reception and was giving away bottles to anyone who was interested. So my teacher took 3 and put them in the backseat of her car. Again, this was a hot summer day in July. After saying their goodbyes, my teacher, her husband, and her parents piled into the car and pulled out onto the highway, where 2 bottles burst open, spraying champagne everywhere and causing quite a ruckus. Of course, while this was happening, the car was swerving as the driver was also getting bathed in sparkling champagne. So it came as no surprise that as soon as they collected themselves, they saw the familiar flashing lights of a state trooper and pulled over. According to my teacher, the first thing the cop said was, "I'm not gonna ask if you've been drinking because I can smell it from here." My teacher tried explaining what had happened, but the cop wouldn't hear of it and ordered everyone out of the car. That's when the cop saw that everyone, both drivers and passengers, were dressed in their finery, but soaked with champagne, and looking quite shaken. A cursory search showed the open bottles, but the cop still insisted on a quick sobriety check just to make sure. That must have been a sight. You have been visited by the ingenious Joe. Comment brain so you always see the glass half full. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.